In this AfterFX tutorial, we're going to talk about one of the very important aspects of AfterFX, which is the render pipeline and understanding how effects and properties are applied to layers. We're going to begin by dragging out one of our solids into a new timeline, and this fills in the entire work area, which is great, or visible area, and I'm going to go ahead and lock that because I'm going to make a new layer on top with Control Y. This is also found under Layer, New, Solid. And I'd like to go ahead and give this a different color so the purple will work, and I'm also going to make it small so it's 100 pixels by 100 pixels. This way I can see it on top of the other layer. Now the two things that we're going to do are we are going to apply a drop shadow to this and rotate it. We're also going to apply a fill color to it to show you which effect is applied first, the drop shadow or fill. So let's go ahead and start with applying drop shadow to it. If I drag down my timeline just a little bit, I can see my effects and presets on the right, and I can look in there to find perspective, and I can find drop shadow eventually. There's drop shadow. Now, one of the nice things about using the drop shadow effects and presets on the right is that there are lots of different presets that you can drag out if you like. I'm going to go ahead and just apply the effect a different way. There's two different ways to apply effects. I could right click and choose Effect and go to the effect that I want, such as drop shadow, or I can go up to the top menu and find the drop shadow there. What's important in both cases, or all three cases, is that I have the layer that I want to apply this effect to currently selected. So I'll apply a drop shadow, and here's the settings on the left. I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit more distance and give it just a little bit of softness. Now you can see that we have this shadow applied, and the shadow is on the bottom right hand side of that object. Now if I rotate this square, I'd like the drop shadow to stay at the same place. However, that doesn't necessarily happen. So I'm going to open up all of my different effects over on the left hand side, all my transform and effects, just to see what happens. Now you can see we have effects here, we have drop shadow, and then we have transform underneath that. Well, the render queue, or the render pipeline rather, is very important in Flash. What happens is when you have a layer, it starts with the beginning of that layer from the top down and works through all the different effects and applies them as it goes. So it means that it will apply position before it applies scale and before it applies rotation and opacity. It also means that the drop shadow will be applied first. So if we go ahead and rotate something after it has a drop shadow, I'm going to go to about 5 seconds and give it a revolution of 1 or maybe 2 rotations. You'll see that if I go back a little bit, what's happening here is that the drop shadow is being applied before it's rotated to 312 degrees. That's why the drop shadow is on the right hand side. So in order to make it so we can rotate our object before we apply the drop shadow, there are two different ways that we'll have to go through. The first one is by applying an effect, and the second one is by doing what's called precomp. So let's look at the first thing about effects. I told you that I'd like to fill this object with a different color, just to show you the render pipeline as well. So I'm going to right click, go to Effect, and this is under Generate and Fill. Now currently I've filled this with red, and you can see that the drop shadow is applied on the top, and then the fill is second. What that does is it makes everything red, including the drop shadow. Because of the render pipeline, anything that's on top is rendered first. If I drag the fill above drop shadow, that means the fill will be applied to the object before the drop shadow gets applied, and that way the drop shadow can still be black. Now, there's one cool thing about doing these rotations and stuff that is really kind of fun, and that is that there's a new effect that's applied that's called transform. So the transform panel down here can actually be applied as an effect. I'm going to go ahead and do that by right clicking on the object, going to effects, and it is somewhere here, distort, there it is, transform. Now this transform has the same things of anchor point, position, scale, and it also has skew, rotation, and opacity. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and apply the keyframes that I already have, such as these scale keyframes, to a different area. So I'm going to select them and cut them with Control X, go up to the transform, find, let's see, if I select the transform and paste, I don't think it will go where I want. But if I go to rotation and make a keyframe, that way it knows that rotation is selected, and then I paste, it will actually paste the keyframes that we had before to this object, or to that particular property. Now, kind of something that's fun is that you can apply any like keyframes to any other type of object, or any other type of effect, and we'll work with that later. So here we have the transform effect applied, but notice that the drop shadow is still traveling around the rotation. That's because we need to take the transform and drag it above our drop shadow, and even above our fill in this case. Let's see what happens. Let's make sure that we don't have any other rotations on here. We do have the rotation still happening at the bottom, so let's go ahead and remove that. And here should be our animation. Notice now that our object is rotating and the drop shadow is staying in the same place, but it's still rotating, but it's just staying where it's supposed to on that right hand side. That is because we've applied the transform before we've applied the drop shadow. So that's a nice way of doing it, the transform as a effect rather than properties. Now if we want to go back to the properties, I'm going to go ahead and delete the effect, go back to transform here, click on rotation, and paste. Here's how we'd have to do it. There's a special command in AfterFX which is called precomp. And what this allows me to do is this allows me to go ahead and apply a or to move a layer or set of layers into a composition that's now brought into the composition we're in. So here's how it goes. First off, I want to delete my drop shadow because I don't want the drop shadow to go into the other comp. I just want the rotation to move. And now I do Control, Shift, and C. And this is pre-compose. We might be able to find this under Composition or Layer. There it is. Layer, Pre-compose. Control, Shift, plus C. If we right-click, I don't think we get it. So pre-compose is what we're going to do. We can give it a new name if we like. This is the 100 by 100 square rotation. And we're going to move all of our attributes into the new composition. What this does is make sure that all the fills and effects and everything else are moved into the other composition. We click OK. Now look what we have. It's just a footage item of that item rotating. Now we can apply our drop shadow. Effect, perspective, drop shadow. And let's go ahead and give it a little bit more and a little bit softness. And there you can see we've accomplished the same thing, but this time we pre-composed rather than applying the transform as an effect. We'll be practicing this at other times, so it takes a little bit of getting used to. Thank you.